Welcome to my workshop. In today's video I want to test out two cheap dowel makers from Banggood. One of them, it's cheap and it comes from a brand known as Enjoy Wood, and the other one is even cheaper. And as I am recording this video, it's costing about 22 British pounds. However, it's currently on offer. Normal price is about 34 quid. The cheaper version, that's about 13 pounds on offer as well. And the normal price is about 28 quid. So in total, depending if you can get a deal, these could be really cheap. However, are they actually worth getting at all, even at that lower price range? Well, today we're gonna find out. I'm gonna test both of them, compare the features, so then you can decide for yourself if any of them is actually good for you. First of all, let's start with the cheapest option. Alright, so that's what you get in the box. Not a lot, to be absolutely honest with you. That's the main body of the jig. And then you do have the blade and some keys to attach everything together. The main body of the jig is actually pretty well made. There's no blemishes. It looks really nice and solid, and it's quite heavy as well. And this part over here, right in the middle, you can undo these bolts to actually change the position of it to be able to cut different sizes of dowels. And it starts from 8mm and it goes right up to 20. The first thing you need to do is to install this carbide blade. As you can see, it does have 4 sides, so when one wears out, you can just swap it around to the next one. To install the blade, firstly we need to remove this middle part. To get really nice dowels, what you need to make sure is that the blade is sitting nicely and squarely in this little cutout. Okay, it does have a lip just over here and on this side. Now what tends to happen as you do up this bolt that's holding the blade itself, in the last push when you're going to be securing it, it may actually twist the blade just ever so slightly, okay? And you definitely want to avoid that. So hopefully I'll be able to show you this. So as I do it up, it actually twisted the blade just ever so slightly. Not sure if you're going to be able to see it, but it's definitely not square to the jig. What I suggest you do, put the blade against something straight that will be holding it in place as you tighten that bolt up. And make sure it's a softish material, for example plywood, so you don't damage the blade. So just hold it like that and tighten it up. And that means the blade will not twist on you. The first bolt, as you drive it in, it will allow you to more or less pivot the knife, okay, around the perimeter of the jig. However, when you tighten that up, that will lock in place a little bit. But the second bolt actually allows you to lock it in place, so it's not going to move on you even under pressure. However, from another side, that's actually a little bit problematic. So when you want to change the size of your dowels, actually you have to remove one bolt fully and then undo slightly the middle one. So if you are changing the sizes of your dowels constantly, that could be a little bit, you know, time consuming. As you can see, the front of those entries, they're actually empty, okay? So that will allow for the cutting head to be able to do its job. However, on the back, they are actually full circles, so they will guide the dowel out, okay? So in theory, there shouldn't be too much wobble and it should produce nice results. Now you don't get any clamps with this. That's the whole jig. That's how it looks like. And the only way to actually secure it correctly is by attaching it to your workbench with some screws. Okay, that's what I'm gonna do right now. So make sure this is nice and stably installed on your workbench. Now the next question is, how do you actually mount this on your drill? Well, there's few ways you can do this. You can just use a chisel and chamfer down the edges so they fit in the chuck of your drill, for example. Another way to do it is actually to have these socket keys, okay? The only problem with that is, depending on the size of the dowel you want to get, is having the right size of the socket keys. In my case, this is 10 millimeters, and I'm going to use a socket that's 11 millimeters. That should work just fine. So what you do, just install the piece in your vise, for example, or in a nice and steady position. Grab the socket key, just like so, and drive it through. Now I can quite easily install this in my drill. However, if you don't have a socket key that's large enough for the blank you're trying to do, well, grab yourself a chisel and chisel it down to the right size so it fits your key. So everything's ready, but before we go, this is the crucial part I wanted to share with you. This is 10 by 10 millimeters, and let's say I want to have a 10 millimeter dowel. As it is right now, it will not fit in that 10 millimeter hole. So what do you think you can do? Again, use a chisel to chamfer the front edge so it fits in that slot. However, don't do that, okay? That it will be too much material to remove for that little blade, okay? You will have to put a lot of pressure and it's just not going to be working for you. What I suggest you do is to go 2 sizes higher to start with. So, for example, for 10 millimeters, I will go for 14, 12, and then 10 at the end to get the final size. In that way, you're not putting too much pressure on your drill, on the piece of wood that you're going to be cutting, and on the jig itself. I think that's the best way to do it. However, that will mean you will never get the 20 millimeter size dowel, as well 20 millimeters is the max this jig will go. I think that's one of the downsides of these types of jigs. Yeah, you can try and force it through, that's up to you, but I'm telling you, that's not going to work very well for you. So I'm going to start with the 14 millimeters, then 12, and then the final 10 millimeter shape. Right, so we just went with the 14 millimeter hole. Now I'm going to swap it over to the 12 millimeter. And now I'm going to take it to the final size, which is 10 millimeters. Now hopefully you'll be able to see the exact size on my calipers it's showing is just under 1 centimeter, okay? There's fractions of millimeters just below. However, with that, well, you do need to give it a slight sand. So you're going to remove another fraction of a millimeter off. And my findings, they will always come just a hair below that size that's on the jig itself. So now let's run this through the 9 millimeter dowel hole and see if that's actually going to be perfect. Now, to make sure that the size of your dowel will be absolutely perfect as well, don't spin it out, okay? Just remove it without using the drill. I've got much smoother finish now on the 9 millimeters, and see if it actually is 9 millimeters. There you go. Absolutely perfect 9 millimeters. Hope you can see that now. As you can see, there is a bit of a process and a couple of things you need to remember when using these, well, very simple jigs to get decent results. First of all, make sure the blade is sitting correctly. If it's gonna be off by a little bit, then the cuts will not be accurate. Where it comes to the blank size, it needs to be a little bit bigger than the final size of your dowel. If you want a 10 millimeter dowel, you need to have a blank that's a hair bigger than that. Otherwise, it's not gonna happen and you will have unsized dowel and it won't have a nice round solid shape. And finally, the most important one, as you're going to be running through your blank, make sure to run it through 2 sizes up. So if you want 10 millimeters, run it through 14, then 12, and then 10. Okay, that will ensure you're not going to put too much pressure on your blank, as it could just snap off, break off, and on the jig itself, on the cutting head. Okay, very, very important to actually get a decent result. The quality and the result of it will also depend on the type of wood you're going to be using. Pine is definitely not the best, and is very porous, very soft, and you will have blemishes on it. If you're going to use some hardwood, like for example oak, the quality of the finish of the blank will be far better. Now I've got another blank that's 14 millimeters by 14 millimeters, and I do want to have a 12 millimeter dowel. Now again, I'm actually going to be running it through a hole that's 18 millimeters, then 16, then 14, and then finally at 12. Why is that? Why a little bit more? Well, without chamfering the edge, I can fit that in the hole that's 18 millimeters. Again, I don't want to put too much pressure on the jig itself and on the piece of timber. Right, let's check it out. If it is 12, moves, yeah. I hope you can see it. It's 12 millimeters, maybe just a tiny fraction of under 12. So as you can see, that's the performance of the cheapest, I think it's the cheapest jig out there for cutting dowels on Banggood, and it does a decent enough job. Is it perfect? No, it's not, of course it's not, but we'll see in a few moments the second, a little bit more expensive jig, and we'll compare what type of results we can get from a more expensive kit. Alright, then let's check out what we get in the bit more expensive package, and we do get few more things over here. First of all, you actually do get some screws to secure the jig to your workbench. However, you can also use these really handy clamps, and tell you what, you can use them not just for this jig. They could be quite handy in many scenarios around your workshop. So, bit of a bonus, 2 clamps. On top of it, you do get a key, and another very interesting thing that you get in this package, mainly this chuck adapter for your drill bit. So if you've got a larger dowel to cut out, you just pre-drill the hole, screw this in, and that's the end you're going to use in your chuck. But we'll try that out and see if it actually works or not. And finally, the main jig itself, okay? Obviously, as you can see, we've got different sizes of dowels we can cut. The largest one is 20 mil, the smallest one is 8 millimeters. The principles of using this jig are exactly the same as on the other jig. Make sure the blade is in the correct position. If you want to cut out a 10 millimeter dowel, start off larger. So for example, 14, 12, and then 10, okay? Operating this jig is a little bit easier, as you only got one pivot point that you don't actually move, and this brass screw just over here that you can undo with your fingers, quite easy, and then you can move in the cutting head, okay? It does have some positive stops on it, so it actually jumps into the correct position straight away. So yeah, that's a really nice quality touch over here from Enjoy Wood. Screw that on and Bob's your uncle. You don't need any extra keys to actually change the size of your dowel. So that's a lot quicker and better, in my opinion, comparing it to the first jig. The way the clamps work, they actually go in those 2 dedicated holes over here, so you've got a nice and steady connection. However, in my case, they actually don't have enough reach to go over my workbench, okay? So that's one of the things you need to consider. How thick is your workbench? Are you going to be able to install them? And the maximum reach of this clamp is 70 millimeters. However, as I said, you do get some screws, so I'm just going to screw that onto my workbench as I did with the first jig. I've got this 18 by 18 millimeter blank, and I'm going to try to use this piece to mount this on my drill. Now I've chamfered the front of it so it actually fits into a 20 millimeter hole, and from the 18 I think I'm going to try to get a 16 millimeter dowel. So I'm going to go 20, 18, and in the end the 16. Okay then, so how do you actually mount this? First of all, we need to pinpoint the middle of our blank. Pre-drill a hole. And now we can drive this through. There we go, that seems to be nice and stable in there. Okay, let's change the location of the cutter head to 20mm, and it's ever so simple to do. You only undo that one thing, shift it over, put the pin back in, screw it on tightly, that's not moving anywhere. So much faster, so much easier to use it on this jig. I've actually took this middle part out to make sure the cutting knife is in the right position, as I did on the first jig. Now that's what I was afraid of, okay? This thing just spins on itself inside of the piece of timber. Okay, so not the best solution in my opinion here. Yeah, I can just spin it with my hands with no issues at all. So yeah, I don't think it's a nice touch that they've added it. However, I think it's not gonna be the best solution in this particular case. So yeah, I'm just gonna chamfer off the edges and use the socket keys that I did before. And there you go, my blank is sitting tightly in the socket key. And there you go guys, Bob's your uncle. Nice, simple, beautiful dowel. Obviously it does require a bit of sanding, but not too much. And let's have a look at the dimensions. It should be 16mm. Similar results to the first jig, is a touch, a hair under 16mm. Hope you can see that. And let's do one more. I've got this 10x10 blank, and let's say I want to cut out a 9mm dowel as we did in the first jig. And let's check out the size. Again, it's fraction below 10mm. And there you go guys, that's the bit more expensive jig. The end result is actually very, very similar to the first jig. Now the only difference I can see between both of the jigs when cutting this is that the second jig gave me a little bit smoother finish to the first one. It seems that the first one was actually cutting it faster a little bit. However, the quality is definitely better. The finish is a lot smoother on the second jig. Okay, now I actually prefer the second jig, the bit more expensive one, mainly for one aspect. Yeah, it's got the extra clamps that I can't use on my workbench, but it's there. It does have this little thing that in theory it should allow you to mount your blank on a drill bit, but as you've seen, it just spins inside, so not the best solution in my opinion. But the thing that actually sold me for the second jig is the ease of using it. Okay, you only got one brass screw that you can undo with your hands. You don't need any extra keys, and it operates so much better. Okay, it does have some positive stops and those lovely clicks. Listen to this. Hope you can hear that. It will stop in the designated space, and you just install that brass knob, that brass screw in place, and that's it. Whereas with the first jig, unfortunately, you do need the key, and you need to undo one of the bolts fully, second one just loosen it up a little bit. So from that perspective, this is actually a lot quicker and easier to use. However, from another side, I actually do like the base plate better on the first jig that uses 4 screws. It's far more stable than the second jig that uses only 1 screw at both ends. So it may tend to wobble on your workbench. So yeah, it's not a clear winner. It all depends what you want. This is cheaper, this is a little bit more expensive. This comes with some extra fancy gear, but overall, they will produce you a solid result. Not super accurate. Don't count on dowels that will be bob on 10 millimeters or 18 millimeters or whatever these say on the front. They will all be just a hair, a tiny fraction under that value in both jigs. And to be fair, from my experience, that's fine, because it's a lot easier to, for example, now use these dowels as plugs, as you can quite easily put them in the pre-drilled hole. Okay, so not a problem for me. If you are looking for something that's ultra precise and you do want to have that 10 millimeter exactly, these may not be for you. For anybody else that's just looking for a dowel cutter or a plug cutter, they're gonna work. They both will be absolutely fine, as long as you follow the steps that I already told you about in my video. Now, if any of them piqued your interest, I'm going to leave some links down below in the description of this video, so you can go have a look, checking them out and read a little bit more about them. However, for today, that's all. But before you go, I do have some really cool playlists over here. Click on those and maybe you'll find your next video to watch. But that's it for today. Thank you very much. Take care.